you for that introduction. So following on Daniel's talk is quite an honor, because now this vast collection of robots standing in front of you gets to talk about a different kind of robots that are outside of our bodies that we can then turn around and start to use to heal our bodies. And since this is about ideas, and we're asking about what are our dangerous ideas, my most dangerous idea, I think, is that technology really can be harnessed to help us and to heal us, which may seem like a very strange idea, as our wisdom is far outstripped right now by our ability to destroy our planet with technology. But if someday we can get our wisdom to catch up, then we may be able to turn our technology to good. So I'm director of medical research at a company that makes surgical robots. And these robots enable a wide variety of minimally invasive surgeries through very small incisions. And when you're making something like this, it's really important to understand who are your patients. Not just who are your patients right now, but who are your patients going to be in the future. And so I'm going to look at who these patients are going to be a little bit, as well as show you something about these robots. So our world is facing two very different kinds of healthcare challenges that on the face of it look completely different. 1.5 billion people in the world lack access to even the most basic healthcare. They're often dying young of preventable diseases, and in the countries with the least access to healthcare, children under the age of 15 often make up over 50% of the population. And they're not really worried about minimally invasive surgery. I have nothing to offer them right now. But at the same time, the affluent nations are aging very rapidly. In this map projection, the land area is distorted to represent the percentage of the population over 65. And it's a very startling view of the world. In many countries in Europe and Asia, the percentage of people over 65 is greater than the percentage of children under 15. And as we humans age, more and more of us need surgery to treat the diseases of aging, to keep us healthy and still productive into these later years. And so the healthcare needs of regions such as Africa seem very, very different from the healthcare needs in Europe and Asia. And the Americas, all of us sort of seem to be somewhere in between. But even with this current disparity, I would put to you that as we develop our current tools and as we apply more technology to surgery and to medical care, we can start to solve the problems that are all over the globe. Now, I'm a technologist, bit of a geek, and so I hope I can be forgiven for hoping that there are technological solutions to these kinds of problems. But I think that there's ample precedent for this. Now, my topic is the future, which is a rather bold thing to be trying to address. But I think to understand the future, you need to also be able to understand the past. And so if we look back, we say that we can see that we have always used technology in order to improve the condition. Surgery and surgical technology is thousands of years old. In Stone Age cultures, bold, daring surgeries like trephanations were carried out with Stone Age tools. We are a technology-driven species. In the Bronze Age and beyond, we pushed each new technology that we had, not just for increasing our food production and for killing each other, but also for healing each other. Anesthesia, asepsis, antibiotics, these were all technological innovations which revolutionized surgery and medicine at the turn of the last century. And combining these technologies allowed us to enter the previously unexplored landscape of the body, to enter, to modify, and to heal. Now, I will warn you, I'm a surgeon, and there are some surgical images coming up in a bit. But in his notable history of medicine, McGrew observed that these innovations, these technological innovations, ushered in the age of heroes in surgery. And the names of many of these heroes are with us still today. Joseph Lister, the father of asepsis, Theodore Billroth, who showed us that we could radically replumb the body and make it work better, Harvey Cushing, the father of modern neurosurgery, and Alfred Blalock with his pioneering work in the heart. These distinguished men took surgery in new and daring directions, surgery on the gut, the heart, the brain. Diseases that were historically untreatable today have surgical cures. But these historic big surgeries definitely left their mark. And this is the challenge that's laid before this next generation of technologists. How can we take the benefits that we can see of being able to do these surgical changes without leaving the patient struggling to recover from the cuts that we've made just to get inside? And so with the help of technology, we are entering a new age in surgery. And the pace of technological innovation has become so fast that today's surgical treatment is reinventing itself again and again at a rate that would leave the last century's surgeons dizzy. And as we're leaving the surgery's age of the heroes, I would put to you that we're entering the age, with digital age technology, we're entering the age of the superhero. Because after all, what's the difference between man and Superman? It's superpowers. And with technology, we can give the surgeon superpowers. We can take them beyond the physical limitations of our hands and our eyes, and in some cases even our brains, to allow better therapies for our patients. So one of the technological superpowers is that of super dexterity. As we seek to replace these large surgical incisions with small ones, we need to put the capability of the hand on the other side of that small incision. And what you see here is these surgical hands that are controlled directly by the surgeon's hands that are sitting at a console, and the motion of these little instruments follows every motion that the surgeon's hands are making. That needle that you see there is about the size of an eyelash. Now, there's a huge amount of technology in between that surgeon's hands and those surgical instruments. And we've got a large, bulky robot that's in between the two of them right now. But this is technology 1.0. This is where we are right now. This robot was introduced in 1999, and since then, there are thousands of these robots in hospitals all around the world, enabling surgeries that are very delicate and precise, such as this prostatectomy, which is very deep down inside the pelvis. It also allows you to, without cracking through the chest, be able to place instruments between the ribs and sew a vessel onto a beating heart to bypass a blockage on that heart itself. We can use these small instruments to go inside the heart and directly repair the valves. We take a chronic condition and we repair it, and then that person is no longer on anticoagulants and they're not walking around with an artificial valve inside. So today, surgical robots are allowing us to do surgeries that we could only really dream about even 10 years ago. Now, these possibilities expand when we realize that with, it's not moving. These possibilities expand when we realize that we can change the scale of reality. So with robotics, we can take the comfortable motion of a surgeon's hand and scale it such that it can be microscopic or even nanoscopic, tremor-free motion. And we can take technologies like the femtosecond laser, and we can start to have the dexterity to perform modificational surgery on the cellular level. And surprisingly, recently we've been finding that a lot of diseases that we think of as chronic diseases, sleep apnea, diabetes, morbid obesity, and even hypertension, can have surgical cures if we can operate precisely enough. So now imagine having a minimally invasive procedure with a short recovery time, because I've only made an incision this big to get inside you, and you throw away a lifetime of chronic medication. This is likely to be a rather disruptive technology, but it's going to be a very important one as we struggle looking at our aging populations and how we're going to keep everyone healthy without breaking the economies of every country in the world as we are trying to put money into healthcare. So with these powers of dexterity and scale, we're going to need also the ability to see beyond what's apparent to mere mortals. And we have this very excellent organ, our eye, but it's very easy to fool, and there's lots of information outside of what that eye can see. This is an image from cancer surgery. One of the biggest problems with these kinds of, we're just looking at with reflected light at a surgical field, and there's cancer here, but you can't necessarily see it, and you can't see it if it's below the surface. But we can use near-infrared vision, a frequency that our eyes are not sensitive to, but that can penetrate tissue much better. We can inject dyes, and then we can track that cancer. We can make it glow, we can see through the tissue into it, and then now we can give our surgeons supervision. They can see into the tissues, and they can see where that cancer is. We can inject these dyes into the site where there's a cancer, and we can trace where the flow of lymph goes from where that cancer is to the lymph node. The lymph node is the first place that a cancer will lodge after it first leaves the site where it's grown up. And if we can get those lymph nodes out, we can often better diagnose and even cure that cancer. We can use these markers also to trace where the blood flows. And so that when we put that bypass vessel on the heart, we can check to make sure that the blood is actually flowing into the vessels that we intended it to before we close back up. We can check that what we did was the right thing. This is an image from kidney cancer, and you can see that the kidney cells light up because they're very active. They pull this dye in, and the cancer doesn't. And you can see the vessels flowing through that cancer. And so we can see where the cancer is and where the cancer isn't, and we can cut it out that much more accurately. This is liver cancer as well. And the technological advances outside of surgery are also serving to improve our ability to provide good surgeries for our patients. Biologists are starting not just to mark the cells, but also to look at a lot of cellular communication so that we can find these cancers much, much earlier. And when they're found early, they haven't spread, we can go in minimally invasively, and we can make a more targeted therapy and perhaps effect a cure. Integrated together on a robotic platform, we'll be able to increase today's surgeon's superhero's ability to find, reach, and see everything, to go inside and to heal the disease, and to leave the patient whole and intact, and most importantly, functional after we've effected this cure. As we collectively age, these capabilities are going to be as important as ever. The population over 65 is a result of a trend that takes about a generation to play out. So this is a snapshot of the world today, but it isn't at all static, and it isn't necessarily predictive of where we're going. So I'm 40 years old. You're never supposed to admit that, but I am 40 years old. And I was born in 1968 in New Zealand. And when I was born, 12% of the population there was over 60, and my life expectancy at birth was 71. So I'm a little over middle-aged right now. But if I were born there today, my life expectancy would be over 80. Already 17% of the population is over 60. But tiny little New Zealand, stuck off in the corner of the map as it most usually is not alone in these trends. A lot of the world has changed its life expectancy even in my lifetime. And we can see that the world today is very different from what it has been. So to get a bit more perspective on this, let's look back, even though I'm talking about the future, to understand it, let's look back 100 years before I was born, with Hans Rosling's amazing software, the Gapminder. This allows us to graphically represent the trends that we're seeing. So I have income per person, GDP per capita, on the x-axis, and life expectancy at birth on the y-axis. So the colors are regions, and you can see that the Asia Pacific and East Asia, India in blue, Middle East in green, Sub-Saharan Africa in blue, dark blue, and the Americas are in yellow. The sizes of these dots represent the populations of countries such as India, China, Mexico. Oh, you can't read them terribly well, but the sizes of the dots represent the population of that country. And in 1868, there are clearly some differences between the countries, but the world's average life expectancy is under 35 years. So I'm not middle-aged in that world. I'm actually fairly old in that world. Europe is ahead of the rest of the world in both income and life expectancy, but not by that much. So now if we play time forward, we can see that all of the countries start to rise. We see Europe and the United States cross through life expectancies of about 60 in the 1930s, followed by Southeast Asia and the rest of the Americas in the 1960s. So we get to 1968, and we see that the developing world is not that far behind the developed world, but that there is a gap, and that gap has opened up. Now, these are dramatic changes, but since 1968, something even more amazing has happened, and what we call the developing world has caught up. Since 1968, the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia passed through life expectancies of 60 in the 1980s, and sub-Saharan Africa probably would have been there now if not for the twin devastations of HIV and war. The overwhelming majority of the world's population born today has a life expectancy of over 65 years old. And by this metric, the developing world has very, very little meaning. And so within my lifetime, we've seen this convergence. We all started together well over 140 years ago. The world sharply diverged, and it's converging again. So why did this gap open, and why did it close? How are these countries catching up? And I think it's technology. Or more specifically, communication about technology. The availability of technology without having to reinvent it over and over again. With modern communication, when there's a new and better technology like a windmill, the rest of the world can adapt it and adopt it for local use. They can put it in an appropriate scale, and they can electrify a rural village in Africa with technology that didn't have to be invented there. So even the poorest nations which lack infrastructure, such as piped-in clean water, can make a technological leap into wireless communication and distributed energy generation. Medical technologies, I think, will make similar leaps. So in light of all of this, I believe that the technological superpower, but I also would say that high-tech medical devices are not going to trump access to clean water as an indication of, or as a promoter of a population's health. But they can help address the aging time bomb that's about to go off. So before, in the previous graphs, we saw that a population's life expectancy isn't as directly correlated to wealth as we might expect. And the percentage of people over 60 is only loosely correlated. But if instead I've got income per person on the bottom and population over 60 on the x-axis here, but if instead I change that to doctors per 1,000 people on the x-axis and population over 60 on the y-axis, we see a much more linear correlation. The most populous nations right now have a long life expectancy, but not a large percentage of their population over 60. But we notice that as we have a large population over 60, we need a lot more doctors. So this will play out in the rest of my lifetime. And as we are moving beyond, as these countries are moving beyond basic preventative care and caring for their elderly populations, doctors are going to be essential and in very short supply. And surgeons are going to be needed as populations start to age, especially if we start treating chronic diseases surgically. So if we can use it wisely, I would say that technology that seems only solely to benefit the wealthier nations can help play a part in hastening the rise of these groups as they're struggling to deal with their aging populations. So in light of all this, I think that the technological superpower that we give our surgeons that is going to change the world the most is power of communication. The fiber optic and the satellite backbones that make up this global communication network are going to enable telementoring, teaching over a distance. And some might think that because I make robots, I would want telesurgery, doing surgery over a distance, to be the technology. But I don't believe in a model that promotes centralization of skills. Telesurgery might enable one person to get a surgery in a remote location, but you really haven't done much other than that one patient, one surgery situation. Telementoring, on the other hand, allows a remote master surgeon to mentor a less experienced local surgeon through a procedure. And that gives two benefits. One, the patient at that remote location got the benefit of the master surgeon being part of their care, and then the local surgeon also learned how better to do that procedure for the benefit of the entire local community. But a lot of this depends on the doctor and the surgeon. We are giving this technology to these people. And so I want to say they get a bit lost in this discussion. So who are these new masked men going to be? Who are the new superheroes? Surgery's age of the superhero looks very different from surgery's age of the hero. For one, they're not all men, and they don't all look European anymore. So technologically driven surgical innovation is found all over the world. And I want to introduce you to the surgery's age of the superhero, because they will soon be bringing their technological superpowers to a hospital near you. Thank you very much.